please do. It really does help Liran. Looking at just my face is not very exciting. Trust me, he sees it far too often. And it really does help him know if he's giving you some value and if it's hitting the mark, if he can see your lovely faces. But we also appreciate you might not be in a place or an environment that's conducive to have your cameras on right now. So we're not going to force you to turn them on.
But the cameras are definitely welcome, and I think it's a great way for you to connect with others as well, knowing someone's face. And you know, all of you are foreign trained lawyers. You're coming to this country. You don't have those networks, so you have to start building them. And GLC is a great place to do that. So if you're wonderful, that would be great. And we can kind of have some sense of normalcy in this time of COVID.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So officially, welcome to Global Lawyers of Canada's first virtual mentor office hours of 2021. We are incredibly grateful to have you all here today with us. It is the first Monday of the year as well. What a way to kick off 2021 by listening to Liran Kandin give his top 10 tips for writing and preparing for the NCA exams and the Ontario bar exams specifically. So Liran's going to give us a little presentation. He's going to share some of his thoughts, his tips, and he's going to give a little introduction to himself, and then we're going to do a little Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions for Liran or for myself, by all means, you can ask me too. Please do drop them in the chat box whilst we're going through Liran's presentation, and then we will get to the questions in a little while for you. But in the meantime, we just ask a little housekeeping. If you could all mute yourselves whilst Liran's presenting, that way it stops with any interference for everybody listening in the background. And then we'll unmute you during question time. So Liran, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining this talk. How is my share screen? Do you see the slides? Just the slides, nothing else, no notes or anything like that? Oh, great, that looks awesome. And Miguel, thank you for turning your camera on. Lovely to see you. Okay, let me just give you a little bit of background about myself. This January is my 9th year of running NCA Tutor. So it's been 9 years since I've been prepping students for the NCA exams, a little bit less for the Ontario bar exams. I've worked with well over 2,200 students from over 65 countries, I believe now. Yeah, the journey started about 9 years ago. Prior to doing law, my background is a business major. So I spent 5 years in business school at the University of Toronto. I did immigrate to Canada. I was a year old when I came here. My parents decided to come here, but I pretty much grew up and spent my whole life in Toronto and Thornhill as well, so back and forth between the border of Toronto and Thornhill. And I studied abroad for law. I went to the University of Manchester in the UK, and I did a 3-year degree there. I moved to New York after my 3-year law degree because of a love story, and I met somebody, and anyway, we were trying to figure out where to make a home, so we moved to New York, so which is not her place and not my place. But so we lived in New York for about 3 years, where I was licensed and I practiced corporate, commercial, some international trade law, a little bit of IP with trademark law, and that's my experience practicing. My articling for Ontario, my articles for Ontario were completed in New York. And for those of you that are going through the licensing process in Ontario, Ontario is quite flexible with the process. So you can do international articles or national articles in a different province. That's a big possibility. Some other bars are not as flexible, like BC, for example, where you cannot waive your whole articleship even if you have 20 years experience. There's a minimum 4 months that you have to complete. I don't know if it's still the same during COVID, but I believe it is. So there's a lot of options out there, and that's just my personal pathway. I did not practice in Ontario. I started teaching when I was in New York. I started teaching for the NCAs, and I left private practice because I got a full scholarship to go to the University of Toronto. So I did my master's degree there. I was seriously considering academia. So I went there and I worked on a thesis project. I really enjoyed it. I met some wonderful judges that were teaching courses and practitioners. And I specialized in international trade, but with a mix of constitutional law, which ended up being my favorite subject. And NCA Tutor, it's a much bigger group than just the NCA exams. We do continuing professional development courses for lawyers. We provide Ontario bar training. There's a consulting side of the business. And in addition to all of that, I've spent some time working in the cannabis industry, working on the board of directors and managing the legal counsel for the company, all the outside counsel, and it was a multi-state cannabis company, so we're operating in the US, doing a lot of M&As, a lot of purchases, a lot of securities law, stuff like that, and of course, regulatory law as well. So that's my background, and if you have questions about any of those industries or pathways, I'm happy to speak to it. And for the presentation today, it's very brief. I've just got 10 slides, 12 slides for you, with like 2 words on each slide. But I'm going to talk about 10 tips for studying for the NCAs. These tips are very high level, very broad, because I understand that each of you might have different backgrounds, and some of you may have started the exam, some of you may not even have an assessment yet. So with that in mind, I try to keep these tips as broad as possible, but I welcome detailed questions so I can get into the meat of things, and I'm very happy to do that as well. But I kept the tips very broad, very high level on purpose. Just so that it can make a difference for you and impact you. Okay, so without further ado, let me get to my very first tip, which is planning. Okay, the NCA has recently updated and changed the exam schedule. I don't know if you've looked at this thing, but previously, exams were held 4 times a year, and all of the exams would be given in a 1-week period. Yesterday, I held a session, information session, with 3 students who wrote all 5 of their exams in 1 week. And very impressive. I didn't do that myself, but it is possible to do it. It's even more possible now because the exams are no longer written in 1 week. They're written over a 3-month period. So nothing has changed significantly with the NCA schedule. There's still the same 4 cycles a year that occur for the 5 core subjects. They're offered 4 times a year. So that's not changed. It's just that they've spread them out over a longer period of time. So exams are offered every single month. Okay, so we have essentially 4 sessions. The first session is January to March. I know they consider them individual sessions, January, February, March, but they're really the same cycles that we had before, except spread out over 3 months rather than 1 week. So you have the January to March cycle, April to June, July to September, October to December, 4 cycles a year. And you should plan out your schedule and plan out how you want to tackle these exams, particularly if you are assigned non-core subjects. When I say non-core subjects, I mean the 5 subjects: foundations of Canadian law, professional responsibility, administrative law, criminal law, constitutional law. Those are the 5 core that everybody has to do at a minimum. And so if you are assigned additional subjects on top of that, then you need to plan your schedule carefully, because those other subjects are not offered in every single sitting. So there are 4 exam cycles, as I said. and the non-core subjects are not offered in every exam cycle. I'll give you some examples. For example, civil procedure only offered twice a year, January and July. Contracts 3 times a year, January, May, August. Business twice a year, February, August. Commercial, February, August. Towards February, May, November, 3 times a year. Taxes only twice a year, families only twice a year, evidence is twice, property is twice, and trust is twice. Why is this important? Well, if you end up finishing your exams in January and then your elective is 7 months down the road, you're not going to be done for another 10 months because you got to wait, X amount of time for your results to come in. So you need to plan carefully so that you've completed the process and you're not waiting for one single exam to finish. By the way, if you have questions about anything I'm speaking about, you can feel free to interrupt me at any time. This is a two-way street, so I welcome questions at any time, okay? As long as they're on topic and on point. And at the end, we can open it up for general questions. Let me just also say that if you are given electives to take, and you attempt an elective, so let's say I've decided I'm going to take family law, and I've attempted family law, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, you're unsuccessful. You cannot switch electives. Once you've attempted that exam, you must complete that elective. And so that will significantly impact when you can complete the NCA process if the exam, for example, is only offered twice a year. So you may want to consider the ones that are offered 3 times a year instead, so that you have more opportunities and no big gaps waiting to complete the NCA process. Does that make sense? Good. Awesome. So planning is important, and planning will help kind of alleviate any anxiety or stress with unknowns. Once you have a plan and you know what it is you're setting out to do, that helps you relax a little bit. All right, so that's my first tip, basic tip for you. Let's move on to the next one, which is bite-sized goals, okay? This whole process can seem overwhelming. You have all these exams to do. If you're coming from certain jurisdictions, you might have 8 exams, 9 exams. That could be quite stressful. But you should break down your goals into little ones and celebrate them and enjoy them when you do complete them. Okay, so don't be hard on yourself, especially now. It's a very difficult time. A lot of people are studying on their own. They're not going out. They're not socializing with friends, and you don't have study groups like you normally would. You really do need to celebrate those little wins. These slides will be made available to you, and each of them contain a hyperlink to a longer blog post that we have on our website that goes into great detail. This particular blog post on bite-sized goals was written by Tiffany Salampa, who was a blogger for us and is now recently moved to a different position in our company. She's the director of community outreach, and she's written some wonderful goals, and she actually has a worksheet here that you can use where you plan out the subjects you have to write, and you can see as you complete those subjects, it shows the progress bar and that you've completed. So it's a good way to kind of reward yourself and reward those, achieving those little flag posts until you get to the end of the process, okay? Okay. So that's it for bite-sized goals, but I think bite-sized goals are important because when you're just looking at the overall picture, things can get a bit stressful. And right, take it one step at a time, one piece at a time. You don't have to worry about what other people are doing. I held a session yesterday with 3 people that wrote 5 exams in 1 week. They were all successful, the 3 of them. But I know people that are not successful doing that, right? I had one of my students attempt 7 exams in August. He passed 5 out of 7. Okay, it's fairly good, but he's delayed now. He's delayed by about 6 months because he had to wait for those results 3 months. Actually, more than 3 months. It was about 4 months. And he's got to write them again and then wait again another 3 months. So it's like a 6-month delay, whereas he could have written 5, probably cleared them, and then done another 2. I have other students that do 1 exam per sitting. There are a lot of young parents with really young children. There are people that are working full-time, multiple jobs. People have all different kinds of situations, so don't worry about what others are doing. You should take things at your own pace, okay? Bite-sized goals. Don't try and tackle all 7 in one sitting if you don't think it's a good idea. What order should I write my subjects in? Okay, this is a very frequent question that I've gotten, and my answer has not changed a lot in the last 7 or 8 years. It's been fairly consistent, my answer. And you may hear different variations of this, and that's fine. But I'll explain why I think that this is a good order. So it really depends on whether you have electives or not. So for the moment, I'm going to assume that you don't have any electives. We're just talking about the 5 core subjects. I think your starting point should be constitutional law, whether you have electives or not. Constitutional law is really the foundation for all of the other subjects. At least for the 5 core subjects, there's definitely information that would be helpful had you've taken constitutional law and you understand the distribution of powers between the federal parliament and the provincial legislatures and how those powers are divided and they're mutually exclusive. All of those things will help you understand tort law, contract law, criminal law for sure. There's a significant portion of constitutional law in the criminal law syllabus. I've seen questions range from 30 to 40% that are entirely constitutional law questions on the criminal law exam. Yes, you can learn the constitutional issues and legal tests and frameworks while studying for criminal law. Absolutely. But criminal law is, constitutional law on its own is an independent subject, and you're just learning the Constitution, right? And then you can apply it easily in all the other subjects. So I think it's a great idea to start with constitutional law. Even professional responsibility has constitutional law issues intertwined in that subject. So constitutional law will go a long way in helping you understand, particularly because you're all from different jurisdictions. You've learned a different constitution. It is not the same. And everything else flows from these laws that start up top, and every other law is kind of subordinate to the Constitution. So start with the Constitution. That's my first tip in terms of the order of the exams. When it comes to the other exams, I just have some advice for administrative law and foundations of Canadian law. Foundations of Canadian law covers a lot of subjects and materials, and it doesn't do a very good job at covering them in great detail. So what you're learning is many different things, but you're learning little snippets of many different things. And it's hard to get a good grasp of those concepts, of those 10 topics in the syllabus, because you're not given sufficient background information on them. The textbook readings are light, and they supplement them with articles, which are wonderful articles, but sometimes I find that the articles are quite advanced when you don't have sufficient background information in those subjects. There is a significant amount of overlap of constitutional law and administrative law in the foundation syllabus. And again, you can take foundations first, and you can do well, and you can learn whatever constitutional issues you need for the foundation syllabus and whatever administrative law issues you need for the foundation syllabus. But it will be a lot easier if you've taken constitutional law and administrative law before attempting foundations of Canadian law, or at least in the same sitting, so that you're studying for the 3 together. So if you want to take 3 exams, in the January to March sitting, then I would group those 3 together. At least you're learning constitutional law and admin law. So when you tackle foundations, it should be fine. So the reason I recommend constitutional law and administrative law at the same time as foundations is because those topics may be heavily tested in foundations and you don't have a significant enough grasp of it because of the insufficiency of the details in that course. The syllabus for foundations of Canadian law changed last month, a month and a half ago. And at least, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's at least 5 articles were added to topic 10, which relate to administrative law. Those topics in those articles are very advanced topics, even for administrative law students to understand. So even more of a reason why you would want to know administrative law well prior to taking the foundations exam. Okay, so those are my tips in terms of the order. You can take constitutional law, criminal law in whichever order, so long as it's after constitutional law or at least at the same time. And the same goes for professional responsibility. You can fit it in any order that works with you. As for the rest, if you have elective subjects, then you have to look at when they're offered throughout the year so that you've planned them properly and that you don't have any major gaps. That's all. Okay, but the order of the exam, as long as you've taken Consti first and that you've taken at least administrative law prior to attempting foundations, I think that's going to give you a better chance at passing the foundations exam, which I personally find to be the most difficult out of the 5 core subjects. Okay. Some people's experience will be different, right? So you'll see on Facebook, someone said, oh, I had an easy foundations exam. Bravo, wonderful. There are at least 3 versions of the exam in every sitting, okay? Somebody might have had a light one, but they're speaking from their own personal experience. I'm speaking from experience of the last 9 years and kind of having a feel for those exams that are taking place 4 times a year. And it could be one of the trickiest exams ever. So prepare for it as if it's one of the trickiest exams. And it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. So if you do get that easy version of the foundations exam, if you're so lucky, then wonderful, great. You just over-prepared, that's fine, okay? But you don't want to be in a position where you get to the exam and you don't feel prepared. I'd rather you over-prepare. Okay, so that is my tips for the order of the exam. Maybe I'll open it to questions. Any specific questions you might have about the order of your exams? I hope you're not freaking out if you've signed up for foundations, don't worry. I wrote my foundations exam as one of my first exams, okay? And I'll tell you right now, I had a 40% question on administrative law, and I had no idea what I was doing. Okay, I'm being honest with you. I wrote Baker, Dunsmith. I kind of mixed them in. I wasn't sure. They were just. I mixed my judicial reviews, and somehow I passed that exam. Rena, do you have a question?
So on that, you can reduce the front, whatever is possible. No, I was watching one video. So, do you remember?
I think, I'm not sure if Irina has a question, but we did have one question which kind of goes to one of your first points, which was about planning.
Yes.
Which Issa asked, hopefully I pronounced your name right, Issa. And it was, they have to write 4 core subjects and they're considering writing 1 exam per month. And they're wondering if 1 month to study is sufficient time. I don't know if you're going to cover the timing of how long it takes to study. Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of planning out?
Yeah, so whose question was that? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, Issa Dookie.
Issa, great question. And the question is, it depends. Which is the core subject you don't have to write? I'm assuming because you took it in a Canadian law school, right? So you're exempt from one of the core?
No, actually. I stated in the question that I have 5 core subjects, not 4.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm actually at work, so I wouldn't be speaking that much.
That's
But
okay.
in a nutshell, what I was saying is I thought about planning to do an exam every month and a half,
Mhm,
roughly based on the schedule.
mhm.
And I'm just wondering what kind of what's the amount of hours I should allocate for each particular exam for the 5 core subjects.
Okay, I will try and do this question justice. It's a great question. Um, and, uh, I'm going to mitigate my losses by just saying it depends, because it does depend. It depends on a lot of things which you know, and I don't know about you because I don't know you personally. One of those things is, what are your personal abilities? You should know by now, where you rank amongst your peers in law school and how well you can take on information. Some people are really quick at picking up things, and some people take a little bit longer. Personally, I have to work incredibly hard when I study, and I know for some people it comes a lot easier. So that's one of the things that's going to factor into this. The other thing is, do you have young children at home? And that obviously takes up a significant amount of time. It's very difficult to study. I've got 2 of my own. They're crawling and climbing on top of my head at all types of hours when I'm in meetings online. It's very difficult to do any work, so you have to wait till they're sleeping, and you might be tired if you're working full-time as well. So but there is kind of this, this average of 3 to 4 weeks per course is kind of the average. I would say some people take longer, some people take less, but somewhere around 3 to 4 weeks per subject is a decent time to allocate. Now, whether you need 3 hours per day or 7 hours per day, I think is going to depend on your own abilities as well, and whether you plan on doing a thorough study or whether you're comfortable relying on somebody else's notes, and we will talk about that a little bit later. I do plan on talking about notes. So certainly a month and a half per exam is certainly reasonable and doable. I think 3 weeks per subject is kind of the average that people are allocating. Okay, I hope that kind of touches on the point. And it may take longer or it may take less time depending on your own personal circumstances.
It does. Thank you. I suppose what might help is have you guys ever looked at the amount of hours of study that each particular course requires? I mean, is it about equal, or do particular courses require typically more hours? Like, if perhaps one way to look at it is that if you were teaching the course, would they all be equal in weight, or how does it work?
Yeah, okay, great question. So um, again, it depends on the individual as well. There are some people that find certain topics easier than other people, right? I personally find business law, for example, fairly easy, but I come from a 5-year business degree and I worked in business my entire life. It kind of seems second nature to me. And I've had students had to spend like 2 months trying to understand what's going on because they just don't get the concepts. Um, so the content could make a difference for you. Now, if we're just speaking about the 5 core subjects, there's some content that seem generally easier than others, like professional responsibility. I would say the content is not difficult. Don't be confused though with me saying that the exam is easier, because it's not. I see a lot of people failing professional responsibility. But the content is not difficult to grasp as, for example, administrative law, where the law keeps flipping every 5 years and going back and forth, and we just have a lot of conflicting case law. And so if you do plan on reading case law, you will be confused as you go through it, and you may have to spend additional time trying to understand it. So yes, there are some subjects where the content seems easier. I would say professional responsibility being on the lighter side, but not necessarily easier in terms of the exam. Okay, but professional responsibility materials are very reasonable. I personally spent 3 days studying for that course. I spend 2 weeks making notes. Okay, but I don't study when I make notes. I work really hard, and then I have to go back and I have to review and actually start studying. So I spent like 3 days studying for that. It was a different time though. But I do know students that can do that as well. Okay, so I'm just going to give you one more example, one more extreme example, just to perhaps help you with that. But the short answer to your question is yes, there are some easier subjects like professional responsibility. As for crim, constitutional law, and administrative law, I think it's a personal, it's really personal, up to the individual who's studying and finds administrative law more difficult than criminal law. Some people really like criminal law because you know, the cases are very colorful and gruesome, and so it makes it more interesting and easier to read and complete. But the quantity of the materials for administrative law, constitutional law, and criminal law, I'd say, are equally as heavy as each other. And I would say sort of professional responsibilities on the lighter side. Foundations, the quantity of the material, I would say, is slightly less than the other subjects, but that's the problem with the course, is that when there is an insufficient material, it's very hard to grasp and write a full, well-reasoned answer when you don't have the entirety of the course in front of you. Okay, so that's my take on the 5 core, and I'm just going to give you one extreme example. I had a student approach me 3 weeks before the exam. This was when there used to only be 4 core subjects. Professional responsibility wasn't a required subject. They studied in the US, so they were only assigned 4 core subjects. He came to me 3 weeks before the exam, and he said, "Can you prepare me for this exam? I want to write it in 3 weeks." I'm like, "Okay, well, how many exams?" He goes, "I want to write all 4." I'm like, "All right, it's not a great idea." And so I started asking him, you know, "Tell me where you went to law school." He's like, "I went to NYU." I'm like, "Tell me how you did on the LSAT." He goes, "I scored 177 on the LSAT." So he's in the 99th percentile on the LSAT. He's incredibly intelligent. I said, "Okay." And he goes, "I work full time, but I can get off work at 3 p.m. I said, "Okay." So we saw each other for about 10 days. I saw him for 2 weeks. And then the last week, he just studied on his own. He wrote all 4 exams and he passed all of them. And he did 3 weeks while working full time. It's possible. It is possible to do it. I don't recommend it, but you can do it. Okay, so you know yourself, and hopefully that will give you an idea of what you're capable of handling, and you can compare to what others have done already. Okay?
Thanks, Karen.
Great. I don't see the comments section. I'm not sure why. But if there are...
so far, Liran, so you can. I would also add in that if you're trying to compare the amount of work you need to learn, the volume of material you need to get through. For example, criminal law is the equivalent of criminal law 101 at a Canadian law school. So it is a full course load. So it's a full law school course that you are self-learning. So to add on to what Liran says, that is the volume of material that you have to get through on your own in order to then write or challenge a 4-hour exam at the end. And it's very hard to say, you know, how much time should you study? Like Liran says, I'm a terrible learner. Like I struggle. I'm distracted by the smallest thing. And so for me, I have to work for hours and hours and hours to retain information, because I'm not a natural studier. Some people are. So for me, I could only do 1 at a time, and I had to study for 3 to 4 months, studying 7 days a week for a minimum of 4 hours a day on top of working full time. So, you know, it varies for every single person. So it's very hard to give you an example, but it is a full law course that you are self-learning on a subject that you may not be familiar with, because you may not have done anything like that at your law school where you attended, and it may be very, very different to the type of law that you've done previously, and the way it's examined is very specific to Canadian law schools. It's very different to how I was examined in the UK at law school. So it's not comparable to say that the exam is going to be written the same way. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as well in terms of your planning. So look at the practice exam papers that are on the NCA legal website. Look at, for example, UBC Law School. They have all of their exam papers and sometimes even sometimes even sample answers. Look at those for an idea of the types of questions and the style of questions that are going to come up. Because that, I think, is something that when you're planning to keep in mind is the way that you're going to be examined as well.
That's a very great point. And you touched on one of my next tips coming up soon, which is the practice exams, but we'll get into that a little bit more. One more thing that might factor in, Isa, into this calculation is whether you're risk averse or not. There are some people that are quite happy not having learned everything in great detail, not having read the cases, relied solely on some third party's materials, and they're quite happy to go write that exam. That would give me a panic attack. I cannot rely on other people. I have to rely on myself, which means I need to work harder, longer, because I don't like taking risks. Okay, I'm risk averse. But there are some people that are perfectly comfortable taking those risks and not letting it affect their performance on the exam. And some of it is about that as well. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So if there aren't any other questions on the order of the subjects, we'll perhaps go on to the next one. Voila. Choosing optional subjects. I think I did touch on this already. So the choice of optional subjects is going to depend on, actually, no, I didn't speak about it. So the schedule for one. Okay, so we did talk about the schedule for the optional subjects, and that will help factor into your choice of subjects. And the second thing you want to look at is, people say, what's the easiest NCA subject? Again, I think it's very subjective. I had a tax lawyer that found tax law just fine and dandy. And maybe some of you might not like tax law, and, you'd rather pull your hair out. So personal taste does go into it a lot. I really don't think you should be looking for bird courses though. I think you should be looking for courses that are going to help you either in your practice. So if you think you want to be a family lawyer, then consider taking family law as your subject. If you think you're going to be doing litigation or something like maybe civil procedure, might be relevant, maybe evidence law, maybe relevant to what you're practicing. So try and get the most out of it. That's one piece of advice I would give in terms of choosing an elective. The other advice is, if you're not considering any of the elective subjects as your area of practice, then perhaps you may consider what you might need for either prep or the Ontario bar exams or whatever it is. So some subjects that may overlap with those exams. And in Ontario, I'm happy to share what the exams are that you're tested on. So the Ontario bar exam is split into two. There's a barrister exam and a solicitor exam. The barrister exam covers family law, criminal law, civil litigation, and family, crim, civil litigation, and public law, which is not one of the electives. So taking civil procedure can help, taking family law can help, and you're already taking crim and you're already taking public law. With the solicitor exam, which is held a couple weeks after that, there are 3 subjects. It's business law, and there's 2 business electives. You have commercial law and business organizations. There's real estate, so you can take the property law exam. And then there's estate planning. I'm not sure if there is an estates equivalent in the NCA optional courses, because I'm not familiar with the details of trust law, for example, and whether that covers estate planning and stuff like that. And there may be some overlap in those topics. So maybe consider taking a course that's going to help you in your bar preparations after the NCA process. It would be a good idea. At least you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You're already prepping for those bar classes. or take something that interests your area of practice to see if you even like it and if you want to go into that area. Those are my recommendations. I don't think choosing a bird subject is the best way to select a course, personally. You're investing already a month, at least a month into studying. You may as well study something that's going to be useful to you. But that's mine. But you can choose a bird course if you want. That's an option as well. I just don't know if anything is a bird course. Some people find some topics easier than other people, and it's very subjective. Okay, so that is the fifth one on choosing optional subjects, the fourth tip rather. Number 5, exam writing. Okay. The style and the way you write your exams is very important. You have to be organized. Organization is going to affect your grades. Okay, I can tell you that right now. You should be organized. And the same is in your practice. When you're writing a legal memo or an internal memo or whatever it is, you want to be organized. You should use headings. You can use subheadings. There's nothing against it. Okay, and in fact, I think it's going to help your examiner stay focused when they're reading your paper, and it'll make sure that they don't miss something. In my experience, where I've seen students fail exams and they've challenged those exams, some of the reasons for challenging an exam is because the examiner commented that they had missed a point. And in the appeal, the student writes, no, I actually talked about this in paragraph 6, but it's just like a bunch of paragraphs, and it's very difficult. Sometimes I feel like the examiners might be skimming your answers. And to be fair, I probably would as well. If I had X hundred papers to write, it doesn't take me very long to figure out whether somebody's got a 50 or not, right? Because the pass mark for the NCAs is a 50%. Right? So I can very quickly look at, has the student spotted the proper issues in this question? Have they set out what their legal rules are? And do I have analytical reasoning here? Are they applying themselves? Are they applying the facts of the case to the rules and demonstrating that they can analyze the problem and that they can come to a reasoned conclusion? Or are they merely setting out facts, rules, and jumping to a conclusion with nothing in the middle? Right? The analysis being the key component here. And if there is no analysis, I just need to skim through to see if there is one. If there isn't, they're not passing, right? And so they may miss things if they are skimming the materials. And when I say skimming, like reading, but reading in a way that you're kind of just glancing over. So having headings is going to possibly stop them from missing out materials, because you say, this is the test for standing, and then boom, 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 you've gone through it, here's my analysis, conclusion, right? This is it, right? And so you issue number 2, and you have a heading for issue number 2, right? And you write it out. And that could be very helpful, because if they're skimming, they're like, oh, they've got all these issues, they've got beautiful headings for it, it's organized so nicely, I can see how it's organized, and it's just a pleasure to grade. Versus I'm looking at this giant paper, there are no paragraphs, it's just long, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? I have like 700 papers. Do me a favor, right? Like, help organize it for me. It'll make a difference, and it'll ensure that they're not missing information. Okay, so organize yourself and learn to write using the IRAC method, which is the preferred method. It's not the only method of writing your answers, but if you're writing problem questions on the exam, you should be using the IRAC method. And again, if you click on this link, we have a post about the IRAC method, including this document that the NCA posts discussing the IRAC method. If you've studied in the US, you'll be familiar with IRAC. If you've studied in some other jurisdictions, you may or may not be familiar. That's fine. You can learn it very quickly, but the IRAC method is very similar to the way judgments are written. Okay, and if you want to have an idea of how to write a decision or how to write an answer to an exam question, read a few judgments. It is This is a very important tip. If you read a few judgments, you can see exactly the style. The court set out, these are the issues in this question. These are the rules. They might go through a little bit of history, which you don't have to do on these exams. You really just have to set out what the current legal tests are that you're going to be applying. And you don't go through explanatory notes and trying to explain why the rule is the way the rule is, unless the question really is, asking you to go into those things. You don't need to do that on an open book exam. Everybody knows the rule on an open book exam because you have your books there. And so everybody's capable of looking up the test. That's not the significant, that's not what it's going to drive and give you marks. Okay, but you do have to set out the rules. So maybe there are some marks, but few marks allocated to your rules. And the most significant portion would be your application section, or your A in the IRAC. So IRAC stands for issue, rules, application, or analysis, and conclusion, right? You should spend the majority of your time in your analysis section. The analysis section is where you are demonstrating to the examiner that you know how this legal test works, and you're going to show them. The facts of this case are going to be applied to this test in such and such a way, and you're going to reason through it, and you're going to say, therefore, this must be the conclusion. Now, be very careful about simply rehashing facts and then setting out a conclusion, where you miss all of the logical steps and how you arrive to that conclusion. That is not a legal analysis. That's just rehashing the facts and setting a conclusion. I know in your head you feel like you've done an analysis because your brain is doing it, but you haven't written it down. Right? So your brain works a lot faster than you can write and think. You're thinking a lot faster than you can write. But you have to get that thinking down on paper, and that's your critical analytical reasoning. That's the most important part of these exams. So just anything you can take from today, it is this portion. And some of you may be coming from jurisdictions where that was not the emphasis for various reasons. Maybe your degree was an undergraduate degree versus a graduate degree like in North America, right? And so the expectations were, oh, we're just going to test you on the laws and memorization and regurgitation of those laws. No, here you need to go beyond that. And if you don't go beyond that, it's going to be very difficult to get a passing grade. But if you do go beyond that, even if you have a weak analysis, but you do have an analysis and it makes sense and it leads to your conclusions, you should totally be fine and get your 50% and move on. Okay, so exam writing, organization, using things like IRAC and headings can significantly improve your grades for these exams. Please do it. Okay. Any questions on this area? We have a group of very shy people today. All right. Good. I hope you're preparing questions for me at the end. All right. Notes. Notes. Prepare them. Make your notes. There are no better notes than your own notes, because you know those notes. You've prepared them. Of course, there are the realities where some people just don't have the time to make notes. They could take between 60 to 100 hours to prepare notes. So yes, you may want to procure notes, but do verify where you're getting them from. Not just verify where you're getting them from, but also verify the content of the notes. Okay, you should be checking it out. Because just because somebody passed the exam, it doesn't make them an expert in this. And I can tell you that from personal experience. I've been teaching 9 years now, and I often have light bulb moments where it's like, oh, that's how that is, right? It's been 9 years into the process. And I did a master's, specializing in constitutional law, and I'm still learning constitutional law. And what I know today, 9 years later, is significantly a lot more than what I learned when I first started teaching. But I'll tell you, I never got in front of a classroom until I was tutoring people privately, individually for at least 5 years, until I felt like I really knew and understood the materials. It's much easier in a private setting where if you don't know something, you simply say, okay, I need to get back to you on that. Let me figure it out and I'll get back to you. I wouldn't put myself in a classroom of 25, 30 people unless I did feel comfortable. About our own notes, when I started the NCA process and I was preparing notes, I prepared notes for myself. And I ended up sharing them with my own friends, my own group of circle, and they asked me if they could share it with their friends. And so I just made them available online. And for 4 years, I used to give out my notes for free, just my foundations notes. I think over 5,000 people use them. I was just giving them out for free. Tutoring was mainly where, where I was working and making an income. But the syllabi continuously changed within those 4-year period, and the revisions started getting greater and new textbooks were added and a lot more articles, and my students were asking me to update them, and so significant time had to go into updating them. So I did start charging for the notes eventually, and the new updates I started charging for. But for the first 4 to 5 years, my notes were entirely free. The good thing about that is that I had thousands of eyes on those notes. And a lot of corrections were made over the years. And so the notes are still not perfect. There still could be mistakes, but I think for the most part, we've worked out most of those kinks. And that's one of the benefits from our notes, is that we've had many eyes on them over the years, which is good. And a lot of people have relied on them to successfully, complete their exams. Should you rely solely on notes? I don't think it's a good idea. I know there are people that rely solely on my notes. I obviously cannot advise that, because the purpose of notes is to summarize materials. You're not going to have everything in there. And you may be tested on some, I'll give you one example. How did you feel about the dissenting opinion in University of Ottawa and Ncaa? That was a real question. I don't know. What is the dissenting opinion? I didn't write every single dissenting opinion in my notes. I mean, if you looked up the case and you read what the majority said, you still won't know what the dissent was about. They could have dissented about anything, right? They could have agreed with the majority's position or the outcome or whatever. You have no idea what they dissented about. It's worth getting the textbooks if you can. I don't think you should go into the optional readings. I don't think you should go beyond the core textbooks, but you should do some very basic, at least the minimum that's required in the textbook. I think the purpose of notes is to help save you time making summaries, and more importantly, to be an aid on the exam, right? So in my session yesterday, one of the students said, your notes were helpful for studying, but where I really found them helpful was on the exam. I relied on them like hell, because you had a detailed table of contents which listed the cases. I was able to go to them in a flash, and I knew exactly where I was looking to find the legal test, and it was just incredibly helpful during the exam, much more so during the studying period, because this student was actually looking up cases and reading and learning. So I think that the primary purpose of notes is to summarize the materials and the content so you can quickly find them during your exams and remember what it is you learned already, if you did the grunt work. Are there people that rely solely on my notes and pass? Yes, I can't recommend it, because you could miss something, or you could be tested on something that's obscure. Try not to take shortcuts, because the reality is when you're practicing, you are reading a lot of information, and this is your training for that. You need to be able to absorb a lot of content very quickly and find what the important bits are. And this is all part of that process, okay? And for those of you that are already lawyers and practicing, you know this. The amount of information you have to read is huge. It's just a ton. And just start getting used to reading that information and picking out the important points. Okay, so that's my advice on notes. I just want to mention a couple more things. there are these frameworks that are being passed around by students, like a framework on how to answer a question. I have some of those frameworks in my notes as well. I do have, like, structures set out. But I would strongly caution you to use these frameworks with care, because I find that many people try to rely on these blindly, and they start talking about things that have no relevance in the exam question. They'll start saying, oh, I need to start my question with standing. Do we have standing? Then I need to move on to the next step is there an infringement here? Okay, and then I need to move to the next step. Then I need to talk about remedies. But if you've read the question, it's not about that. And people are trying to force their framework down into this question. And it is going to create a lot of problems for you. You're going to get into trouble, and you may fail the exam. Do not talk about things that are irrelevant. Your question should be structured as per what's being asked of you on the exam, and not the other way around. You do not make your answer, don't make the question fit your answer. Okay, you have to make your answer fit the question. So I hope that's clear, the warning, because it does happen a lot. People rely on these structures. They don't really understand the content or the material, and they're not able to issue spot correctly, and therefore they're not able to answer the questions properly because they're speaking off topic. And although the NCA says there is no negative marking, in my experience, that is not true. There is negative marking. I mean, unofficially. Okay, officially there isn't, but I'm happy to share one example with you. A student came to my class after failing the NCA Foundations exam 3 times. And, we had a discussion, and I asked him, what sort of comments did you get? Well, I said, first of all, what were your grades? And I think the first time he wrote the exam, he got something like 43. The second time he wrote the exam, he got a 34, give or take a few percentage. I don't remember, this was years ago. And the final time, the third time, not the final, but the third time he wrote the exam, he got 1. I kid you not, this is a true story. He got 1 on the exam. So what happened? I said, what do you mean? He's like, I feel like I'm getting dumber. I'm like, how? How is that possible? You've studied for this 3 times, right? How are your grades going down? And, I asked him to write some sample answers for me so I can evaluate them. And I realized what his problem was. His problem was, he had a few problems. Okay, but one of his problems was that he was attempting to write everything he knew into the exam paper. Everything he knew. He's like, oh, this is a question about amending procedures. Oh, amending procedures. There are 5 amending procedures. The first amending procedure is Section 38. Section 38, you need the 7/50 rule. Blah, blah, blah. Second amending procedure is Section 41. Unanimity. Unanimity is required for the following 5 unanimous procedures. Just a whole bunch of rambling that had nothing to do with addressing the question. And, I asked him, I said, what kind of comments did you receive? And the examiner says something like, maybe you said something that was on point in your answer, but I couldn't give you marks for it because it was just so incoherent. And it was just all over the place. It wasn't organized. And yes, you did touch on the answer slightly in passing, but I couldn't give you marks for it. Because you clearly don't know what you're doing on the whole, which seems to me to say that there is negative marking because you should have got the marks for what you got right. But overall, your answer. So what happened was this person threw crap on the wall just to see what will stick. They were hoping something would stick, and that's not a good approach. You need to organize your answers. You need to think carefully what you're going to write and then start writing. And planning is a big part of that. So in my experience, there may be negative marking. And I honestly think that grade of 1 was fair. I think that was a wake-up call for this person and helped him understand. Otherwise, he wasn't gonna he didn't understand why he kept failing. And you know, giving him a 1 was a signal to him, and then he came to help. He came for help, and we were able to figure out what went wrong. All right, so be careful about relying on these frameworks. Make sure that you are tailoring your answer to the question being asked and not simply just following this framework blindly. Okay? Lovely. Oh, yes. Is there a question? Okay. Jean? Hi, Jean.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
Hello, hello.
Hi, I can hear you.
Hello. Sorry, I'm late.
Okay. Hi, welcome. Does anyone have a question? No?
Pamela has a question around textbooks and resources and notes and difficulty in finding them when you're located outside of Canada. Are there ebooks available? And does anyone have any insights of where people might be able to find these?
Great, and that's a really good segue into tip number 7, buying textbooks. Right? You read my mind, Pamela. The publishers will ship out textbooks if you ask them to. You may have to call them. Their websites might not allow it, but if you phone them, they will ship them out. And I've had students in India and other locations get their hands on textbooks. You can also purchase e-textbooks from certain publishers, not all of them. So eMont offers e-textbooks, and you can buy like a yearly license or a lifetime license from them. The difficulty with the e-textbook is, I told you that I'm risk averse, and I don't like to take any risks on my exams, which means I like to have my textbooks with me on the exam. Just in case they ask me, what is the dissenting opinion in this case? I need the textbook in front of me so I can look up the case and I can figure out what the dissenting opinion is. If you buy that ebook, you're not going to be able to print it. The ebooks usually limit you to printing 5 pages at a time or something like that. It's going to be a real pain to try and print an ebook. So having the physical copy of the book is important. No matter which country you're in, you will usually be able to resell your textbook. Especially in countries where there are fewer textbooks available. There are more and more people writing these exams abroad. Okay, so if you have online places to resell textbooks, I'm sure somebody will pick them up from you. And there is a Facebook group I have called NCA Textbook Buy and Sell. That might be a great place if you put your location and whatever it is, and you should, typically you can recoup at least 60% of the costs of your books. So I strongly recommend that you do buy the textbooks if you can, the physical textbooks and not the ebooks. But there are ebooks. I think even Carswell and Hogg's book is now available in electronic version as well. They've now made it available. They give you like a yearly license or something like that. So it is possible to find the books in electronic version for most at least the core ones. I think they are all available in ebook format. Okay, it's just you can't have an electronic book during your exam. Okay, you can only have print materials in front of you for the exam. Okay, does that help? Yeah. Should you buy them? Again, if you're a risk-averse person like me, I recommend you buy them. I recommend that you have them. I recommend that you do read them, because if you do rely on somebody's notes, you're going to want to make sure that the notes are accurate by reading it yourself, reading the content yourself. And you want it just in case you need to reference it during your exam, in case your notes are not comprehensive. Right? Okay, so that's the slide on textbooks. I actually wanted to talk about textbooks, and I wanted to say that I do recommend you buy them. Pamela, you should get the criminal code, for example. printing off the online version of the criminal code is going to be over 1,000 pages long. I think the PDF version is even more because it's in French and English. And it is just incredibly tedious to use. And on, you know, that version of the exam, it doesn't have a table of contents. The page numbers are not numbered properly. It's incredibly difficult to look up offenses. And whereas the pocket criminal code, which is like 55 bucks, I think they're selling the 2020 version for 35 bucks right now, brand new. And you can have that shipped to you for whatever, even if it's another 35 bucks to ship it, whatever it is, it's probably still worth it and cheaper than printing costs in some cases. So having the criminal code with you is incredibly important for the criminal law exam, particularly when you're studying for that exam, because you need to learn how to use that code. You shouldn't be opening that code for the first time on the exam. Your study process should be, how do I interpret this? How do I interpret these sections? Where are the definitions? Where are different things? So you need to study with that code, and it's a good idea to have it in print version in front of you. Okay. Some textbooks I think are more useful than others. Personally, I'm not a fan of the Roche textbook, but you might find the Roche textbook helpful. I had Roche as a professor at U of T, and just the lectures kind of were very academic, and they kind of went in circles, and then we never really got to the point, and I just left very confused. So if you like, the textbook sometimes does that as well. But you can still figure out, because there's still cases that he's referencing that are important cases, and you can go into those cases yourself. But yeah, some textbooks do seem more helpful than others. The administrative law casebook is awful. It's just a list of cases and very little in the way of commentaries or explanations, and you're doing a lot just to, you know, read through these cases and figure out what the tests are and what you're supposed to take from these cases, because there's very little commentary. But most case books are like that, right? The contracts book is very much like that as well, at least one of the contract books. Okay. But nevertheless, it's your table of authorities. It's what you need to cite during the exam. So having those books are important, because you're not going to print out all those cases. Rather, taking in the case book with you is going to be helpful. So if you do have to look up the case, you can during the exam. Again, are you risk averse or not? Do you want to take the risk? Do you want to rely solely on notes? If you're completely comfortable and that does not create anxiety for you, then you can do it, and you can just rely on notes. If you think that it's going to make you anxious because you feel like you don't know everything, you don't have all the information in front of you on the exam, and you don't want to take a risk of losing 6 months, let alone, I mean, the money as well for the exam, but you might lose 6 months of your time, then perhaps be prepared, be over-prepared, and have the books with you. That's my take on it, okay? Great question, Kandin, thank you.
Thanks, that was very useful.
Okay.
Thank you.
And there may be people in your country with the books, so do join. If you have Facebook, we've got a textbook exchange group, and well, that's where I tell my students to post it if they're in another country. Practice. Okay, practice makes perfect. Siobhan mentioned the UBC Peter Allard School of Law. I think that's an incredible resource. I will post, maybe Siobhan can do that if she has the link to the UBC Peter Allard School of Law. It's actually in this hyperlink as well. So Siobhan will send out the slides to you, or I'll get the list and I can send it out after the presentation. There's a hyperlink to the slide, which takes you to our exam blog, and there's a link to the Peter Allard School of Law. They post at least 7 years worth of law school exams, several exams per year. So it'll be like 3 tort exams that year for each different professor. You have tons of practice exams. You don't have answers, but you have practice exams. Okay, so how do you know if you're on the right track and stuff? And who do you compare it with? There is no better sample exam than a Supreme Court of Canada decision. If you want to see what a sample exam answer should look like, all you have to look to is the analysis section of a Supreme Court decision. There's nothing better than that. And I have so much pressure on me to release sample exam answers. People are like, why don't you sell them? Why don't you offer them? And the answers, I used to do it. I used to do it many years ago. And I found that many people were just relying on the structure of those answers and not applying them all. So I stopped doing it. But secondly, because it made people lazy and it meant that they weren't going to read decisions. And the decisions are the best sample answers that are available to you. So they're free. They're free. You go into the Supreme Court website and you say, how do I do an Aboriginal rights question? But they've done it. Take a look at Chilcotin Nation. Take a look at Powley. Take a look at Vanderpeet. Take a look at any of those decisions and look at their analysis step by step. It's beautiful. No one can write a better answer than that because that is the law and that's how it should be, right? And I'm not saying that you need to read 10,000 decisions. There are a couple of critical cases in each major area of law. Those are the ones you need to look at, right? How do I write, freedom of religion, charter rights question? You look at 1 or 2 freedom of religion questions and you're good. How do I do equality? You look at the latest equality cases and you're good, right? You just need to look at 1 or 2 decisions. And those are your sample answers and they're free. Okay, absolutely free. Okay, so do those and do try practice questions. They're very helpful. We run exam workshops, so I go through exam workshops and I don't give you practice answers. In those workshops, I give you the tools to get to the answers. We get there together and I talk about what the common pitfalls are in those exams. I talk about what is expected of you, what does the analysis look like, and I try to get it out of you. Okay, I tried to get that analysis out of you. So that's what I'm attempting to do, and many people find those exam workshops incredibly helpful. Okay, practice is important. Very good. So that's my tip number 8. We're almost on tip number 10. We're now on number 9. Avoid information overload. This is another excellent blog post that was written by Tiffany, and I recommend you read it. But I want to talk about information overload because it's very possible. I know some people try to procure notes from multiple sources, 3, 4, 5 sources, and they're trying to study all of them. I strongly advise against doing this. It could create a big problem. The primary source, there's nothing better than the primary source. So if you have the textbook and you have the cases from the textbook, then you can look up the cases yourself. If you do rely on notes, fine, but you should at least do the mandatory readings yourself. But don't go beyond that. Use someone that's trusted, and don't overwork yourself. Don't use multiple sets of notes. I don't think that's a good idea. It could create a headache. And just a word of caution, for example, for constitutional law. Maybe not for constitutional, but follow the syllabi. The syllabi offer very good advice. They're very detailed. And you are incredibly lucky to be writing the NCA exams in this time. When I wrote administrative law, you know what our syllabus was? Read these 2 textbooks. That was it. Nothing. No page numbers, no topics, no range of pages, nothing. Read these 2 textbooks. I kid you not. It was a horrible time. Okay, you have very detailed syllabi that tell you exactly what you're supposed to be learning, which pages and everything, and it's great, it's wonderful. And you're living in a time where you're writing 3-hour exams in a 4-hour period. Also wonderful, right? And the exam process is getting smoother and smoother each time. That's why they've spread it out over a 3-week period, so there aren't going to be many more technical difficulties. Okay, so avoid information overload, avoid getting too much content, too much information. Rely on yourselves whenever possible, okay? And then the last tip is get inspired, okay? find somebody that can motivate you, that can inspire you. Siobhan inspires me. I'm not just saying that, but it's real because she somehow manages to, I feel like she's the life of GLC, or one of the lives of GLC, but she's incredibly active and she's putting on a lot of great events for you guys while working a full-time job and not getting paid for this, of course. There are many great stories. I posted a story about one of my students who is working multiple jobs just to feed his family, jobs that have nothing to do with law. And I'm just in awe of those people. I know that story. I know that immigrant story. My parents did the same thing. My mom used to clean houses and do all kinds of things. She worked 3 jobs when she first arrived in Canada. And so I'm inspired by the resilience of those types of people. I've got a link posted here, and Siobhan, you and I have talked about this video before. This is a video by somebody by the name of Amy Cuddy, and this is a very inspiring motivational speech by her. It's a TED talk that she did. It's about 20 minutes long, and I hope you will feel inspired after watching this video. I certainly have been, and I've shared it many times with others. So find that inspiration, find something that's going to motivate you. You are not alone in this process. There are lots of people here. GLC is here to connect you with others. Don't feel like you're alone, okay? If the Facebook groups overwhelm you, forget about the Facebook groups. Find yourself a mentor. We have a mentorship program as well where you get paired one-on-one. I hope it's okay if I share that information. You get paired one-on-one with a lawyer who is happy to meet with you one-on-one. It's entirely free. We have limited the applications to recent immigrants to the country just because I feel like they have the least amount of connections here. So if you are Canadian born but you went abroad to study, you will still, your application will still be considered, but if we do have applicants that are recent immigrants, we will consider them first. You can find the mentorship program on our website at nca-tutor.com. There's a tab, click on the tab that says more, you'll see mentorship program. There's an application you can fill out and submit your resume. We have roughly 14 or 15 lawyers now, and those numbers are growing. And I've recently hired somebody that's going to assist me with the administration of that program. So I hope to be improving that program and do similar talks to what Siobhan is doing as well. We'll do quick, group mentorships as well as the individual ones. Okay, so that's it for my 10 very broad, high-level tips. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. But I am very happy. Oh, wow, there's a lot of comments now. Okay.
Sorry, the comments we've been going through. So you're all set. We've been trying to answer them throughout. But guys, if you do have any questions for Liran, now is your time. I know this session is running a little longer than we've done other sessions in the past.
My apologies.
You may have to go to work and things like that. But if you do have a question, now is your opportunity. So do drop it in the chat box. It's the easiest way, and then I will call on you to ask your question. But please just keep your question brief, then we can get through as many of them as possible. I know you all have amazing stories to share, and we will share those in a different session. Never fear. But Liran, thank you so much for your top 10 whilst people are writing the questions, busy typing away in the background. Thank you. They were fantastic. So many great points, and you guys can hopefully put those into action yourselves no matter what stage you're at in your journey. I know you're all coming in at different stages and you're all in lovely places around the world. And do reach out to Liran and myself and the rest of the GLC community. If you haven't connected with GLC yet, I have posted the link to the GLC website in the chat box down here. You can join us for free. We don't have a membership fee right now, so now is the best time to join us. We have Facebook groups, of course. We have Instagram, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, we have a YouTube channel where we put all of these lovely videos for you guys to watch again so that you can get the best from it. But please do reach out to us. The committee is on the GLC website, and you can connect with any of us. We're in chapters across the country, So all the way from the Atlantic region, all the way to BC. So there are people across the country who are going through this process, have been through this process, and are here wanting to help and support you as much as possible. Is there a free mentorship also for the Ontario Bar, not the NCA, for temporary visitors, not migrants?
So the mentorship program doesn't matter what stage of the licensing program process you're in. The purpose of mentorship is to kind of hold your hand, be there as a soundboard if you need to talk to somebody, need help with, how do I break into the market? How do I network? You want to talk to somebody in confidence. That's the purpose of the mentorship program. They're not mentoring you specifically for exams or passing the licensing exams. They can, give you tips on it, but that's not the goal of the mentorship program, but it's really to make connections and to have somebody that you can bounce ideas off of. They're all employed in different areas of law. We have people working for Bennett Jones. I think we have 2 people now working at PwC, and some in-house counsel people. So all walks of life. So it's not specific to any particular exam. Okay.
We have another question. Are you doing online classes for the upcoming sessions, Liran? I believe the answer to that is yes. Please go to the NCA Tutor website and check out the schedule on there, and all the information is there. If you want to use Liran's services, please go to his website. You'll see it all there. As with anybody, do your due diligence. If you're taking notes, you're taking advice from anybody, you are a lawyer or soon to be lawyer. Do your due diligence for anybody.
I've had a disbarred lawyer in our group selling notes that didn't belong to him. Do your due diligence. It's a great
do due diligence on everybody, on everything, guys. This is your career. Take charge of it, advocate for yourselves on this, as always. Pamela, another great question from you today. Do I get prejudiced if I don't do an elective course, especially when looking for a job in a particular field? Well, there's 2 sides to this. One is, have you been assessed to do an elective course? If you haven't been assessed to do it, then you're not going to do it. However, if you're thinking more about applying for jobs later on, then there is, and we have this discussion regularly, Liran and I do, about this, and also with everybody else in the GLC community, Canadian experience. Do you have relevant work experience in the area of law that you want to go into? And you have to demonstrate that you have the skill set and the experience for it, whether that's because you took a course in it or because you have worked in that area beforehand. I don't think it will matter, and Liran, correct me if I'm wrong, whether you've done an NCA elective in that subject, because honestly, all they're going to see is that you have your certificate of qualification, which you get from completing your NCA requirements, which then means you're now at the level as somebody who has done a Canadian JD or LLB, depending on which school you go to in Canada. So that's all it's doing. It's just putting you on a level playing field as somebody who's coming out of a Canadian law school.
Yet to receive my assessment currently. I'm in a full-time job. It would be appreciated if you could guide me about how and when to initiate my preparation at this stage. I don't think you should prepare until you have your assessment. I know you might be very eager to start studying, but the syllabi change, textbooks change, notes change. If the notes change, you're gonna have to buy them again, just like if the textbooks change, you'd have to buy them again. So I don't think there's a point in getting ahead of yourself. If you want to do some readings or learn some stuff, you can find some things online and just casually start reading, but it's not going to give you a great advantage. I would, there's only so long you can retain information. You don't have to stretch that out longer than necessary. So I think you should wait for your assessment, and when you've decided and planned out your courses, then start studying. That's my advice.
Yeah, I would use this time instead to network. Network with people who are Canadian lawyers, internationally trained lawyers, who are already in Canada or are working towards coming to Canada, reach out to your alumni from wherever you went to law school and see if there's anybody there who's now working here in Canada. And connect with those people and start to build that professional network, because this is an area which people often put off until after they've done their NCA requirements. But then what you find is you then hit a stumbling block in terms of the NCA requirements is just one part of the process. You then have to be admitted to the bar in whichever province or territory you're going to be working in. And that requires obviously the bar exams that Liran talked about earlier, but also some form of experiential training. Now, you may be able to get an exemption, you may be able to get it reduced in terms of the length of time, but you're still going to have to do something. And then you're going to be working in a country that maybe you don't know very many people, and you need to build a book of work, you need to find clients. So using this opportunity now, prior to starting your studying, to network and then continuing, because that is a continuous process for the rest of your life. I'm afraid to say networking doesn't stop at any point, is a really key thing to do. So maybe I personally would focus on that whilst you wait for the NCA board to come back to you with your accreditation requirements.
Completely agree.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm glad you liked our answers. There we go. I guess we're going to do one more question. So if anyone has one final question, we're going to do it, and then we're going to wrap up and let you all go. Liran is about to go into sort of lockdown for the night because he's in France currently, and they actually can't leave the house in the evening in France. So he's about to like go and do whatever he does when he can't leave the house in the evening. But does anyone have any final questions for us this evening? Otherwise, we are going to be back on Thursday with the GLC Women in Law series, which, although it has women in the title, it is just as applicable for everybody. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things. So the first session this week is on the boys club and entrepreneurship as a lawyer. And then we have 7 following sessions. And you'll find all the details on the GLC website and also on our Facebook page and on our LinkedIn page and every social media platform, basically, let's be honest. So final question from Olu Atobi. Gosh, when should we register for the Ontario licensing process? That is a good question. Liran.
Yes, you cannot register. Well, that's not true. You may register pending your certificate, but you need to register once you've completed the NCA process. So you can, let's say you've written your final exam, you can start and register for the licensing process as a licensing candidate, pending your results from the NCA. And once the NCA has sent over the certificate, then you can start writing your exams and articling. But until that certificate of qualification is in their hands, you technically can't start articles and you cannot start the bar exams, the barrister or the solicitor exam. So you need your certificate of qualification. There are some changes now for some of the CPLED provinces that apparently you may start CPLED, you may start prep without having secured articles, but it's not for every province. I don't think BC allows it. Is that?
No.
BC does not allow.
No, BC, you cannot start anything until you have an articling offer.
Yeah, but my understanding is Alberta has made the change, and some other provinces do allow you to start prep prior to securing articles, which is very similar to the Ontario process. You can write your exams before having secured articles, or you can write your exams while you're articling, or you can write your exams after your article, as you wish.
Yeah.
Okay, if you need to get in touch with me, you can do so. Email is the best way because Facebook Messenger tends to get flooded and I lose your messages. They get lost very quickly. So email my first name at lexpd.ca is the easiest way to get in touch. That's Liran at lexpd.ca.
Absolutely, and we will circulate the slides. We will include Liran's and mine's and GLC's contact details so that you can all get in touch with us. And we wish you all a very happy and successful new year. We know that last year was very stressful for people going through their NCA exams. There were a lot of teething problems. The NCA is very aware of that, and they are working incredibly hard to reduce those problems going forward. They've taken on board all of your comments, all of your feedback, everything that we've provided to them as well. And we wish you the best of success. And we hope that we are celebrating all of you joining one of the bars in Canada in the not too distant future. But remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and try and enjoy the process if you can, although that sounds like horrific when you think about it. How isn't a bunch of exams enjoyable? But trust me, you've now connected with GLC, and we make things fun. And you've connected with Liran, and he makes learning fun somehow. So do keep in touch. Let us know how you're getting on. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you all again in the not too distant future. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Liran.
Thank you.